Welcome to another episode of the PFF College Football Show, live from the 2025 NFL Scouting Combine here at our Airbnb in Indianapolis. Max Chavik alongside Dalton Wasserman. Dalton, we are in the Combine in the Convention Center hearing a lot of general managers and head coaches speak at the podium today, kind of just breaking down a lot of the really interesting stuff that we heard at the podium today, but it's going to be fun to break it all down with you, man.
I think what comes out of, these head coaches and these GMs is we try to figure out what their philosophies are, right? When it comes to the draft, when it comes to the offseason, you've mentioned before, a lot of the first-year head coaches and GMs, it's very interesting to get kind of that opening footprint, right? When you're talking about building a roster, building a team, getting to know the character of all these prospects and putting it all together to create a successful unit. It's the hardest thing to do in football, and that's why only the great teams and the great general managers and coaches can do it, but you have to start somewhere, and the Combine is where it starts.
Absolutely, yeah. Like Trevor said before in the PFF NFL show, like we're all here obviously for the on-field drills and testing for all the top prospects, but that's not happening yet. What we can get, though, from these coaches and GMs is during their podium sessions, while they are pretty tight-lipped about most things, they will give you like little hints here and there as to where they might be leaning towards the NFL draft. And let's start off at the top, Dalton, with the number one player on the PFF big board. That is Travis Hunter, the wide receiver / cornerback from Colorado. And we got some interesting quotes from a couple teams at the top of the draft on how they view Travis Hunter. Brian Callahan, the Tennessee Titans head coach, believes Travis Hunter would start at cornerback, and then they'll see what they can get from him there. From Andrew Berry, the Browns general manager, who's picking number 2 overall, he thinks Travis Hunter is primarily a wide receiver, but he could also play corner as a unicorn type of player. So it's fascinating how even the NFL general managers are split on how they view the top player in the draft.
I think it just speaks to how talented he is, right, on both sides of the ball. A guy who was, in the top 7 in both receiving grade and coverage grade this past season among the elite players, a finalist for the Thorpe Award and the Blitnikoff. No, he
won the Blitnikoff Award.
He won the Blitnikoff. I don't think he was a finalist for the Thorpe, but you almost could argue should have been the only cornerback in the country that was top 10 in both man and zone coverage grade. You look at just the amount of talent that he has on both sides, and I've got him wide receiver 1 on my board. I think very, very likely to be cornerback 1 on my board as well. When you talk about having those two separate skills in one body, it's really unprecedented, and it's going to make for a really fun conversation going all the way up to draft night and to see if is he going to go first overall. Obviously, we think he's likely to go in the top 5, but how teams view him and how they can utilize him is going to play a big part in that.
Exactly. That makes him such a unique and special player, is that he's the greatest two-way player we've ever seen, and how you view Travis Hunter could basically be dependent on what your team needs, right? For Tennessee, maybe they need a little bit more help at corner right now. They say, okay, we want to play more at corner. For the Browns, who need help at wide receiver and pretty set at corner, they go, no, we can play him at wide receiver. Like you said, he might be the top receiver and corner in this draft. I mean, he was the Heisman Trophy winner for a reason. Like I said, he's the greatest two-way player of all time. 3rd among all corners in the nation with a 90.3 coverage grade. 6th among all receivers in the nation with an 89 receiving grade. He led the nation with 15 receiving touchdowns, and his 4 interceptions were 5th among all corners in the Power 4. He actually led the Power 4, in receiving touchdowns. So, phenomenal football player, and I think it's fascinating. It's going to be really interesting to see how teams treat him as a wide receiver / cornerback. You still want him to play both ways full time, right?
I think he could do it, let's say, on both sides at about, say, 80% of the time. 100 would be a little bit tough, and we saw games where he tried to do that, where he'd play 135 snaps and only miss 1 or 2, so that might be tough, although there's less plays in an NFL game than a college game. The pacing's a little bit different. I do think one of the more interesting parts of this process is going to be, we talk all the time about, coaches and the GMs. The thing they talk about the most in these pressers is, most important part is we want to get to know these players, right? And so often that's kind of correlated with, okay, they're trying to snuff out any character concerns or something that might drop them off the board for off-field concerns. But with Travis Hunter, I think there's a part that's not being talked about enough. What does he want to do? Right? When you talk about, okay, he wants to give it a go both ways, right? Or is he okay with, all right, at corner and then I'll play 20 snaps at receiver? Or does he take, more of the financial, route to it, where receivers get paid significantly more than corners, right? Especially at the top of the market, going, okay, I could make $40 million, if not more, as a receiver, whereas the top of the corner market right now is about $24-25 million. So I think there's going to be a part to this where teams are going to get in there and talk to Travis Hunter about, in part, what he wants to do. Is he he the sole decision maker in that? No, but there is a significant part of this that I think it's what he believes he's capable of and how he can translate that to an NFL field.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just looking at it right now. There are over 10 receivers that make more than the highest paid corner. So that is a financial element that is important in this discussion is, okay, if he's going to stick to one or the other, financially it makes the most sense to stick to wide receiver. If you're truly that good at one, it's going to be wide receiver, I would imagine.
And the other fun part, too, we also talk about it in the scope of just one. What if, then, he was, say, at 75 to 80% of both? Still at least even an above average. Let's say a B-plus player in the NFL on both sides. That's two players in one.
Yep.
What is his value then? Is it because he's good on both sides? Should he actually be paid higher than the highest paid wide receiver? Is he a $50 million player because he's got both in one body?
I think he might be then. I think he's easily the most valuable non-quarterback in the NFL.
It's the Shohei Ohtani thing, right?
It literally
is. You have to pay this guy all that money because he can do both and do both at a high level.
And the beauty of Travis Hunter, if you are playing them both and he's playing both at a high level, you have him on a cost-controlled contract for 5 years, essentially. So if you have the most valuable non-quarterback in the NFL by a mile on a rookie contract that's making, like $7-8 million a year when he should be making probably $40 to $50 million a year, that is almost like a rookie quarterback contract where you're getting extreme value out of them as well. So that's why I think Travis Hunter is the best non-quarterback in the draft and should be the first non-quarterback selected in this draft just because of how unique of a prospect he is and the fact that he might actually be the best receiver in the draft and the best cornerback in the draft. So I think it's fascinating. I think it's really funny to see all these teams at the top of the draft not even know what to do with him. They go, yeah, I like him at receiver. The other one goes, yeah, I really like him at corner. It just shows, man. I mean, usually in high school recruiting rankings, when guys are listed as an athlete coming out of high school, it's because every player who's like a 5 or 4-star player plays both sides in high school football, right? Because they're the star athletes. When you get to college football, though, you have to pick one or the other. And that's the reason why Travis Hunter, who was originally committed to Florida State, did not end up going to Florida State and went to Jackson State because Deion Sanders told him, hey, I will let you do both. If you really want to play both, I see a lot of myself in you. Deion played corner and wide receiver in college and in the NFL. He's like, I'll let you do both. Florida State said, no, you have to come and play corner. You're not a wide receiver. So he went to Jackson State. He proved he could do both. Went to Colorado, won a Heisman Trophy doing both. And now he's trying to do the unthinkable in the NFL and prove that he could do both at the highest level.
And is it possible that he's just as talented as Deion Sanders?
Maybe
not the baseball. Maybe not on a baseball field.
I don't know. I haven't picked up that yet.
He hasn't tried. Maybe we got to get there too. I think there is that element where you go, how special is this guy? Because we may not know yet, right? It's so rare that you get a guy who steps on a field at the top level, at the NFL level, and is clearly the best athlete. You mentioned it happens in high school because that guy is clearly the best athlete on the field. It occasionally happens in college because he was the best athlete on every field he stepped on. Is that the case in the NFL, and does somebody think that will be the case and enough to make him a top 5, top 3, or even number 1 pick?
It's the most interesting prospect I think we've had in the NFL draft in a very long time. Just what you do with him, how good he is at both. I think it'll just be really, really fascinating. Dawn, I want to talk about another storyline with the Tennessee Titans, and that is Brian Callahan, their head coach, formerly the Bengals offensive coordinator, and someone asked him what he looks for in a quarterback. And I think his answer was really interesting. So what does Brian Callahan look for in a quarterback?
So there's 2 things he said here that I think speak to, obviously, the top prospects in these drafts at the position. And I think Callahan had the most interesting podium, of course, as the team having the first overall pick. But just to get an insight into how he looks at this class, he even got a lot of questions about Abdul Carter. But it's 2 things he said about quarterbacks specifically. One, it's 3 things he looks for: decision-making, accuracy, and timing, right? None of those things necessarily have to do with the physical tools and how impressive you are and if you can throw the ball 90 yards, right, and do all those sorts of things.
They would keep Will Levis if that was the case then.
Right, yeah. Exactly. It's kind of the anti-Will Levis when you think of that explanation. But I think when you're looking at it and trying to understand when you're watching tape of a quarterback, what can he process? What is his mental acuity? How well does he know schemes? How well does he feel under pressure still making his reads, right? Things like that. And then a second thing he said when somebody asked him, okay, well, what do you think about arm strength? He goes, well, you don't have to have the strongest arm, but there is a requisite minimum that you have to have, right? You have to be at a certain level to be able to be capable of making those NFL throws, and I think that's something that people are questioning a lot with Shedeur Sanders and with him not throwing here at the Combine. Well, obviously he doesn't have an A+ Josh Allen arm. We know that, but do these GMs, do these coaches have a feel for, okay, he's got an NFL arm? Personally, I think he does.
Yeah.
But, they talk about all the time, you want to see these guys throw in person. We won't see it till Colorado's Pro Day. Cam Ward from Miami is considered to have a stronger arm, especially on the move, than Shedeur Sanders. But it's the balance of the arm talent versus those other three things Callahan mentioned. Decision-making, great turnover, best turnover-worthy play rate in Power 4 history for Shedeur. Accuracy, all-time FBS leader in completion percentage, and timing and anticipation that go along with that. I like how he delved into the anticipation, and you're able to make up for arm strength when you can throw with timing and anticipation. So these are all the things he's going to be studying on a very granular level about both of these guys if they're inclined to take a quarterback instead of a Hunter or an Abdul Carter.
That's the most fascinating part about this, I think, because everyone thinks, okay, if Tennessee's going to take a quarterback at number 1 overall, it's going to be Cam Ward. And there was reports out that Rand Carthen, their former general manager before he got let go, he was a big fan of Cam Ward, so he probably was the favorite there. Now they have Mike Bergonzi, their new general manager. Who knows how he feels about this quarterback class, but everything we've heard from Brian Callahan, decision-making, accuracy, timing. He even, in a previous interview, said that when I watch Shedeur Sanders, I see a lot of Joe Burrow in his game. And, of course, he coached Joe Burrow with the Cincinnati Bengals as the offensive coordinator. You and I both have Shedeur Sanders QB1, Dalton. I think this is a very quiet storyline that not other people are talking about right now. Shedeur Sanders might have a really good chance at being the number 1 overall pick in the NFL draft.
There's some guys we get to this with, and there's some other names we'll come up with, but the prospect fatigue sort of thing, especially with Shedeur in Colorado, and there's some people out there with the Colorado fatigue. But look, we can tell you he and Travis Hunter are the two primary reasons that Colorado went from the worst Power 4 program in the country within 2 years to going 9-4 this season, and with no running game, with a defense that was getting better but still kind of maybe slightly above average, an offensive line that kind of the pass protection came and went. So he dealt with a tough situation, right? I think he's got a lot of the intangibles. He's only going to come in at 6'1" and maybe 210 pounds. He's not going to be the most physically imposing guy you've ever seen, but Deion Sanders has even said this himself in interviews. His weapon is his mind, right?
Yep.
And I go back to thinking about when Michael Penix said something like that about himself last year when they asked him about, say, a lack of mobility or this or that the other guys have. He goes, my weapon's my processing.
Yep.
And you saw that in the short time that Penix played this year in Atlanta where, along with obviously he's got a cannon. He's got a better arm, pure power arm than Shedeur. But that's the idea is if you're mentally able to handle things at an NFL level, why shouldn't you go that high?
The fact that he mentioned those 3 traits, and when you start Shedeur Sanders' scouting report, those are probably the first 3 traits.
Decision-making, accuracy, and timing.
That's
that
it with him.
Describes him pretty well, I would say so.
And I think, and especially with Cam Ward as well, accuracy, I don't really have too much of an issue there. Processing ability, I think he's got good processing ability, but the timing part, there's some times out there where he's a little late on some throws. I think Shedeur Sanders has the advantage in those 3 specific traits. Now, I do think it's a coin flip between the 2 of them because there are different traits that Cam Ward beats Shedeur Sanders in, mainly tools. But I do think if that is what you're looking for in a quarterback, that to me says more about Shedeur Sanders than it does about Cam Ward. And we've known before from previous interviews, like I said, he does really like Shedeur Sanders if he's comparing him to Joe Burrow a little bit. So my question to you, Dalton, if you are the Tennessee Titans, what do you do at number 1 overall?
Me personally, maybe it's an unpopular opinion, I would take Shedeur Sanders. I think he's the best quarterback. I think this is a team that desperately needs a quarterback. They were last in the NFL in passing grade this past year. Jumpstart this offense, right? You can obviously continue to build the offensive line. The right side of their offensive line needs work. They need another weapon or two. There's a lot to fix on this team, but it gets a lot easier, as we saw with Washington and Jaden Daniels, where, okay, if you have a quarterback, you at least stand a chance to win games, right? They have to improve plenty of things. I understand, about if they want to take the calls about trading down or, they have a need off the edge with Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter is a generational talent too. I would take a quarterback. I think either one of those 2 guys. If they took Cam Ward too, obviously I wouldn't complain. He's got a lot of talent, and Callahan obviously knows what he's looking for in a guy, and if he feels like Cam Ward is that player, then so be it. But that's the direction I would be leaning. We won't know necessarily, though, until we also get through free agency with several of these teams, not just the Titans, where who wants Sam Darnold? who wants Matt Stafford, right? Maybe even Aaron Rodgers. Who knows if somebody else, comes up, or if there's teams that just aren't impressed with the class at all and they want to stall for another year and wait till next year.
And also there were rumors that Borgon's even said in his podium today, he said that we've gotten calls with the number 1 overall pick. So it's not a guarantee that Tennessee sticks and picks at number 1 overall, but I'm with you. If they do stick a pick at number 1, I personally would also take Shedeur Sanders, but is close with Cam Ward as one. Listen, Shedeur Sanders is a guy that, you need to build an offensive line and give him more weapons, but he dealt with an offensive line at Colorado that wasn't that great. He still had elite PFF grades in each of the last 2 years. And yes, he had really good weapons at Colorado. I'm not denying that. But every mouth was fed. He wasn't just like feeding Travis Hunter over and over and over again. He went to a lot of different receivers at Colorado. So I think he is capable of spreading the ball around a lot in an NFL offense as well. So that is a fascinating discussion to be had about the number 1 overall pick with the Tennessee Titans. The last thing, Dolan, I think we got to talk about today is the transfer portal. And how this new NIL and how this new age of college football is not only affecting the game of college football, but how it's affecting scouting for the NFL draft as well. And you've heard a couple of different answers about how that could be pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think when you dig into what the transfer portal is doing as it relates to the scouting process, this is something I heard 3 different times today. Once from Brian Callahan, once from Raiders GM John Spytek, and I can't remember who was the third one on this topic, but they all said the same thing to the effect of it makes life a little bit harder for our area scouts, really when it comes to getting to know a guy's character and his background, right? Because those area scouts are obviously in a certain region of the country, and they kind of track a certain set of schools. And the way it used to be is they would stay and know that they would get to know those players over a period of 3, 4, even 5 years, right? And get to know their character and really get to know them. And it was easier to get those background checks done a lot earlier to where you could get to this stage of the process and feel like, okay, we just need one last interview and we really already have an idea. Take somebody like Cam Ward, Incarnate Word for 2 years, Washington State for 2 years, Miami for a year, 3 different schools in 5 years where you're talking about, okay, we really have to do extra digging on these guys later in the process. It makes it even harder when you have this 3-month time crunch between the end of the season and then getting to the draft at the end of April where you're like, wow, we have a lot of information that we have to find now. So you're going to hear about it, I think, even more and more when you talk about teams looking for character concerns and background checks and going all the way back in the history of guys at multiple different schools. They don't have as good of relationships with the college coaching staffs because guys are bouncing around all over the place and they have to keep digging for information. So I thought it was a fun topic to get into when I heard it several times today because I think that's what you have and it's, look, NIL and the portal is great for the players.
Yeah.
But it does make this process a little bit tougher on the top end and trying to get to know these guys. And even for some guys that come from lower levels, digging through and finding that tape and trying to evaluate, where they improved, why they improved, all these things, it just adds another layer to a process that was already quite difficult.
Yeah, I think, listen, like you said, NIL and the transfer portal, everything has been great for college football and the players, but it has made college football coaches' jobs and scouts' jobs incredibly difficult with how much they got to do. Because like you mentioned, look, we scout obviously here at PFF on a national level. Like we look at as many players nationally as we can, but how NFL teams operate, they do have area scouts. They have guys that only cover one specific area of the country. So when you have guys switching schools every single year, it makes it difficult to really get to know a kid and what he's all about. And also with NIL now, these college football players are basically semi-pro. And now you're starting to see, okay, how do these kids deal with millions of dollars sometimes? And some kids deal with it like nothing else, and that's fine. Okay, we can trust this guy when he gets a multi-million-dollar contract in the NFL. Some kids don't deal with it all that well, right? So it's a very fascinating conversation that they're going on right now is that the transfer portal, NIL, everything, and the fact that these kids are playing 6-7 years of college ball, like Tyler Shuck, who a lot of people like in his quarterback class, he's older than Trevor Lawrence right now. And Trevor Lawrence is about to wrap up his rookie contract, I believe. Who's been in the NFL for at least 4 years now. It makes it a lot more difficult for college scouts and pro scouts to be like, okay, how do we value these kids that have been in college for a full college career more than some other guys? Like Tyler Shuck is 4 years older than some of the guys that are in this class right now. So it's a really fascinating discussion that I think it makes it a lot harder for scouts and GMs.
I'm glad you brought up the quarterbacks, right? Like with Tyler Shuck or even a lot of these guys, because you think about those are the ones that get thought about the most when it comes to leadership and character and intangibles, right? But you look at How many of them are transfers? Shedeur Sanders was a transfer. Now, he had the same coaching staff for the most part. That's a little bit different. Cam Ward transferred twice. Jackson Dart was at USC, was he not? Right. I mean, Riley Leonard was at Duke before Notre Dame.
Dylan Gabriel went.
Dylan Gabriel was at 9 different schools. He had 3 different stickers on his helmet at the Senior Bowl. Will Howard from Kansas State to Ohio State. You just mentioned Tyler Shuck was at 3 different schools, right? And it used to be, and there was a lot less cases because you had to take a year off, and it was obviously much harder to transfer. Is the first question that would get asked, why did he leave?
Yep.
Why did he leave? Was he a problem? Was it a bad fit? Did he butt heads with the coaches? What was it? And now, I mean, so often now the answer is, well, he wanted more cash because it's NIL and this. We know the tampering and all of that goes on and how that goes under, we've even heard the inner workings of a lot of that. But I think you have a situation where there are still times, though, when it is, hey, why did this guy leave?
Yeah.
What's the deal? And having to dig back and talk to a different area scout. And yet you almost have to, for some of these players, find relationships with 2 or 3 different coaches. Let's say Tyler Shuck, right? Talk about it, Oregon. And we know for him it's a lot of injuries and opportunity. But scouts are now gonna have to talk to people at Oregon about his first couple of years, then people at Texas Tech, then Jeff Brom in Louisville and that staff, and obviously they're probably gonna say he's great because he had such a great year for him. But I think it just adds another layer in a process that is so crunched for time. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, the Super Bowl was 2 weeks ago, right? And now we're talking about from the time of the Super Bowl, you have to learn everything you can as possible about 300, 400, 500 guys in a span of 2.5 months. It only makes it more difficult. So as for as interesting as it is for players to be able to move up so easily and go to different schools and have different opportunities, it just adds a completely different layer to the scouts and makes their job a little bit harder.
It makes it a lot harder because you think about it, before, in years past, when, like you said, before transferring was really as big as it is now, you basically have, the Southeast scout would handle this guy's entire career, he present it to everyone, and then they decide nationally, how are they going to rank on the board. Now you got to combine scouting reports from a Southeast scout, a Northeast scout, sometimes a Southwest scout, guys that when we was at Texas Tech, what was he like there? When he was at Oregon, what was he like there? Like you said, multiple scouts now have to talk about the same player over and over again because of how often they've transferred. It's fascinating. And like you said, every single quarterback that's going to be drafted in this class has spent at least 4 years in college. There's not a single redshirt sophomore or true junior quarterback in this class that are going to be drafted. Everyone's been in college for 4 years or longer because NIL has made it that much easier to stay in college. Hey, if I'm not ready for the NFL, why would I go to the NFL too early when you see guys like Jaden Daniels come in after 5 years in college and immediately dominate? Michael Penix Jr. looked really good. Bo Nix looked really good. Caleb Williams, after 3 years in college, struggled in his rookie year, right? So there is a argument to be made that if I'm not totally ready, and NFL teams have shown that, hey, we're going to give up on you after 2 years if you're not showing the stuff, why would I not take advantage of 4 or 5 years in college football instead of coming out after 3 years?
It's the thing Bill Parcells used to talk about with quarterbacks, where he wanted guys who made at least 30 college starts, which essentially equates to 3 years.
Look at Anthony Richardson now. He had
Richardson,
17 starts
I
total?
think about Mitch Trubisky, who was only a 1-year starter at North Carolina, guys like that. It's riskier because they may be physically talented, but the only way you get better at playing football is by playing football in games, right? So, very few guys are so talented where they can only have 1 year as a starter and come into the NFL and be, wow, he's just so good after 1 year in college, and he's just, such a young player who's so great. It doesn't often happen like that, right?
Yeah.
So I do think the experience helps some of these guys, and I think the roads and the adversity that they've gone through is going to help. I think about a Cam Ward and how much adversity he's gone through in his career to get to this point. I think it's a big selling point for him. He's tough as nails, right? When you think about some of these guys who have done that, or even what Shedeur Sanders went through in his first year at Colorado, pretty much getting his ass kicked on the way to only winning 4 games, but getting through that, bouncing back, and having another great season this year. I think it speaks a lot to their character. There's just a lot more layers of these things to go through than there used to be.
I think go back to Shore for a second, one of the most impressive parts about his games that he never forced it. The amount of times, because like you said, they never ran the ball. He was under pressure a lot. A lot of times you would see quarterbacks play hero ball. Like Caleb Williams in his last year at USC played a lot of hero ball that year. You never really saw hero ball from Shedeur Sanders that much. There were times where he took bad sacks, of course, but he never really forced it into tight coverage or anything like that. Again, I think that speaks to him as a quarterback.
It's another reason teams are starting to and scouts are starting to like Tyler Shuck, right?
Yeah.
He's been through a lot of injuries, 3 different schools. He can play off platform. Wasn't he a 5-star recruit or something close to it back in Oregon? You know these things better than me, but he was a big time recruit back at Oregon. and he's been through a lot, and he's come out on the other side better than ever, and I think that's something scouts look into, and they're all going to get asked these questions this week. That's why you see most of the GMs and coaches talk about, we want to come here and get to know these guys more than anything that happens on the field.
Yep, so that covers our day one of the 2025 NFL Scouting Combine. Of course, we'll be here for all 5 days from Monday through Friday this week, so subscribe so you don't miss any of that content. And let us know in the comments below what your main takeaways were from the first day of the 2025 NFL Scouting Combine. For our producers back there, for Dalton Wassman, I'm Max Chadwick. We'll see you guys tomorrow with more coverage from the NFL Scouting Combine here in Indianapolis. Hey, thanks for watching another episode of the PFF College Football Show. Please make sure you guys subscribe to the channel.
Also, subscribe to PFF Plus at subscribe.pff.com for all of the same data and grades that we use in our show, plus fantasy tools, betting tools, and our mock draft simulator.